Welcome back to the Metropole Grid. My name is Andre, and I'm joined by YsengrinSC, who is otherwise known as Jeff. How's it going, man?
Good, great. It's great to be back and chatting about our tier list. These are always a lot of fun, and it's good to actually pay the piper, so to speak, for this set and evaluate our evaluations.
So as you might know, the Automata Initiative was the last set that just came out now. It's been 3 months. I think the last time we did a revisit, it was only a month later. And not only has it been, I think it's 3 months, right? But it's been Continental season and it's been World season. So like these cards that just came out at the end of, I want to say July, have been really put to the test. So we can say with some sort of definition how correct we were about our definitive tier list. Off the top, How do you think we did?
I mean, we talked about this a little bit pre-show, but I think runner side, I'm actually pretty happy with where we ended up. There's a couple of small moves we can talk about, but I think runner side, we actually got like really good. Corpse side, it's a big conversation. I think we got a lot of things wrong, but I think for really interesting reasons. This is like part of the reason I think it's fun to go back and talk about this, because there's a lot of things that are in different places for really different reasons. That's just like, that's always, I think the coolest thing about these is not like, oh, what assumptions were correct, but what assumptions were wrong. And what does that tell us about the game of Netrunner?
Exactly.
That's going to be really fun to talk about.
So that's what this video is going to be. We're going to go through this tier list. We're not going to be as granular as putting it up. Again, links to all those. I think the runner side was on my channel. The corpse side is on your channel, Jeff. So links if you want to watch those before you do this, which I'd recommend, they will be down below. But we're going to go through here. We're going to explain why things ended up this way, why it ended up to be different, and then overall some impressions with the Automata Initiative. Because being correct, being wrong, figuring out why, that's super interesting. But of course, I do want to say this set slaps. It's been a really good set.
Yeah, maybe we should start there. Like, genuinely, this is maybe one of the best metas I've gotten to play in. And it's probably, of my time being a competitive player, which is really like the NSG era, like this is definitely the best meta of that kind of era. So, I think that's in part Flashpoint leaving, but also I think Automata Initiative is such a strong set of bone. Like, it's just got some really cool stuff.
Cool. No, I totally agree. Yeah, it's kind of been such a big deal, especially that we had Worlds and the whole Continental season. Before we get in, just so everyone's on the same page, Jeff, you want to take a second to describe? We have 5 categories here. They're slightly memey, but they're also a bit different than we did things maybe the last tier list. Do you want to run through them?
Yeah, sure. So we've got Ban Me Please. These are cards that we think are so strong that at some point they will be banned, or at least referenced in a ban list article as we thought about banning this, but we felt da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah. Auto includes were sort of, if you're playing generally this faction, but some cards may be a little more universal, you are going to put this card in your deck. If you don't, you're going to have a very, very good reason not to do so. So it's pretty much an auto include in a lot of cases. Next up, we got Build Around. These are cards that, this ends up being the bulk of our ratings, and, maybe one day we'll come up with a way to not have a giant middle category.
Yeah.
But these are cards that are a little bit more like, they're meant to be a little more situational. So if you build with them in mind, they can hit some really high ceilings, but not every deck in that faction is going to want to do that. And there's going to be viable alternates in the faction. I think that's maybe a good way to think about Build Around.
No, I like that a lot.
Next up, we got Slaughter Hard. These are cards that we think are cool and good, but probably weren't going to find their way into decks because they're outclassed by something that's similar in that same card pool. We actually did okay here, but we'll talk about that more in detail. Then finally, we have the Binder category. This is our polite way of saying, I don't think you should be taking these cards out of your binder that you put whenever you get a new set. You sleeve them all, you put them all in your binder. And I think generally these are the ones we expect to stay in the binder and not really come out too often.
It's also worth noting that we were talking about specifically when we do our tier lists, competitive Netrunner. So, what we expect to see at top tables, and of course the standard format. So that's the bigger card pool with a bit of FFG stuff still in there, but that is the idea of what we're talking about. And I think we're going to start here with the runner, and we're going to go through and we're going to talk about some of these cards and where they ended up. And we actually had nothing here in Ban Me Please. And genuinely, I think that's correct. I don't feel like there's any card that really I would, 3 months wiser decide to dunk into that category. There's obviously some power cards, but they kind of feel fair. They feel interesting, at least. That's the way I'd say it. Do you feel different?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the one card that people will be like, why did they talk about this in the Ban Me Please section? It would probably be Hermes. That was a card that everyone was saying like, oh, this card, please, NSG, this is the second coming of Boat, is a take I saw multiple times from different people. It's a really powerful card. I think we're seeing more and more that corps have adapted around it, and runners are starting to not, instead of, in Continentals, which was like the week of release, the week after release, and the week after that, like Hermes was everywhere.
Yeah.
And then at Worlds, we saw Crims running Hermes, and most other decks said, no, I actually can do better with an in-faction console, which, maybe means that it's an auto include. But I think over time, we'll probably end up in a world where some criminal decks want to go back to a Paragon or a Penny Shaver, or maybe even a Swift for some of the deep dive style decks. So
I feel in some ways like really vindicated, because this was definitely one of the weird spots about our tier list originally, because we said, yeah, Hermes is obviously very, very good, but we were also convinced that when this came out, this, mind you, for those who played for a while, is exact text that used to be on a criminal identity that was pretty powerful back in the day. And it's something that, like you said, you learn to play around. Like, you have to change your play patterns, scoring patterns. There's a lot of things that this challenges, and obviously it's very powerful. But yeah, we saw it everywhere, and then it died down. And now even at Worlds, it's only criminals. That being said, too, when we were talking about criminals, why it didn't end up in auto include is that we thought a lot of criminal decks wanted to play an economy-based console like Paragon or Penny Shaver. And generally those consoles, you don't see them. Like, you just don't see them anymore. As much as criminal economy has its own problems, it's like, I think this is the criminal console right now, barring maybe Swift. But yeah, I don't think you see it outside of faction. And we were right that it would slow down and people would get better at playing around it, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah. I think given the way we've described it, it probably could go into auto include. We already had a top of build around, but it's, basically the same place.
Yeah. I think this makes more sense. Obviously, we're going to talk about this, like this decoder in a second, but I do think that this makes sense. But like, we were trying to make it obvious that we thought this was a bit less powerful than originally it looked. And that was mostly correct. Now, speaking of mostly correct too, Arasana. This is also a really interesting one because she's had a very different life throughout. When she came out, people couldn't figure out how to play her for a while. Mind you, Jeff, you took a finalist position at a in-person Continentals, which is super exciting playing Arasana. And that sort of a deck like was so wild. It's so interesting. It's so aggressive. I'd argue that deck also was really good for a couple months when people didn't know how to play around it because it punishes you for playing improperly into it in a way that almost no other runner deck does. And you look at Worlds and we see maybe one Arasana in the top cut, if I'm not mistaken, and that deck's still hard to pilot. What do you think about Arasana?
I think so. We're recording this mostly after the UK Nats has happened, but we haven't had a chance to watch any of it. I'm going to mention it just because Arasana kind of was the Shaper ID that was seeing any play and was still making, of the one Shaper that made top 16 at Worlds, it was an Arasana deck. Arasana was played a lot in the Continental season. I still have a lot of hope for Arasana long term. I think Extract's list, which did top 16 at Worlds, he credited me, so I gotta approve of his list. But I think Arasana is very clearly a powerful Shaper identity. I think we're gonna continue to see it or see her, and I think she's in kind of maybe auto includes a little bit strong, but she kind of was the de facto Shaper identity. And then UK Nats came along and we go and I look at the stats right before we go and record, and it's a bunch of non-Arasana Shapers in the top 16. But that notwithstanding, I think there's a lot of cool power in Arasana. Maybe she could be top of built around instead of auto include, but at a certain point it's pretty close.
Yeah, we were so hyped, mind you, when Arasana came out. It was like the most fun identity to play. It was like a new kind of op ability. It like really challenges how you play the game, and it was super exciting and seemed super powerful. Again, I think the power level goes down the more the corps play into it, but otherwise, yeah, we'll see. Maybe Lat, it turns out to be just a more consistent thing, especially if you know what the meta looks like and you can kind of toolbox into it.
Yeah. I will get on my soapbox for just a second, and I think a lot of people are building their Arasana decks wrong and trying to be like, oh, I'm going to build for the biggest board state, and it's like, no, you build for a very fast propelling to your like mid-level board state. So it's like when I see people playing short gambles and creative commissions but not dirty laundries, I'm like, no, you should do the other way around, like run your laundries first or something like that.
Which is, again, so exciting to talk about that when you're talking about a Shaper deck. Like Dirty Laundry is your first card in a Shaper deck. Sign me up. That seems really fun.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Okay, another one. I think we got maybe some flack for this. This is the price. This card, when it came out, I thought like fundamentally everything this card does is just busted powerful. Searching anything in the top 4, trashing your deck, getting through your deck, firing some of those like trash from the top of your deck synergy cards, and then installing something for -3 cost. That's a lot of value in a single card that gives you a lot of flexibility. Except at the time, nobody played this. It took months for people to start playing this. I think also to some extent, Gachapon, a very similar effect, was super common before DreamNet and Hoshiko got banned out, which is arguably a better tutor effect for that deck on tempo. But now this thing is showing up everywhere. The ability to get down your consoles, your viruses, your connections. It's obviously finally caught on. And I do think this is one of the simplest, easiest to play powerful cards in the whole set.
Yeah, I mean, this is often sure gamble with an upside for Anarch almost, or maybe it's a maybe career fair with significant upside for Anarch, which I think we're going to see it in basically every Anarch deck going forward.
Yeah, and it's a fun card to play, so I don't really think I need to move that around too much. I don't know how you feel about it.
No, okay, that's fine.
Jeff, I feel like we have an issue on tier lists about just like fundamental breakers. I feel like we over-evaluated, what was it called? Cat's Cradle before because it was just seemed good enough to see play. And so we saw this decoder. Mind you, we had 2 criminal breakers in the set, and we put the decoder that comes in at 3 strength at the top. This thing is cheap. It has anti-threat technology, which on its own is its own like interesting discussion. We should talk about how threat landed because it's slightly different, I think, than maybe we thought. But genuinely, most of the criminal lists are not even playing this.
They were in Continental season, and then they dropped it for Worlds to go over to Unity. Yes. So, maybe you could make an argument that that means it's not a good card. I think you could also make an argument of, if you're playing an in-faction decoder for Crim, this is the one. Shibboleth, and it does replace all of them. So, I that's a little bit hard for me to say, right? That probably... this is maybe where our category system maybe has some weaknesses. Yes. But
I think the one thing I was going to say is I think we just need to flip these two because we had in Slots Are Hard a criminal fractor. And this criminal fractor, what it does is really unique. It bypasses his ice. The numbers on it were not very good, but largely most of the barriers you're looking into in the modern meta are 1 and 2 camps, either really low strength, which you can farm, and then really big strength, which you bypass. And this is so good as a barrier answer. And so then you can go out of the way to import even a killer in criminal, which is its own problem, but you import a decoder. Crimpier is kind of really good. I would just swap these and just say slots are kind of hard. You don't need to play a Shibboleth if you're building for a late game criminal, as much as that also sounds like a weird sentence.
Yeah, I think that's true. You probably could just swap those two. So maybe we should talk about why we put Capoeira so low. I think a large part of it was you're just going to run Cleaver instead. Yep. And I think the thing basically the thing we got wrong was, actually it's better. The trade's more favorable because Cleaver is already exerting all this pressure on the barrier space that corpse run. In particular, Cleaver and Turbine or Cleaver and Takobi. So that shifts all the barriers to end up being in a place where Capoeira is really, really good. Yeah. And so then corps go to look at decoders that are really powerful. And so then obviously you don't want to run a crummy decoder, so you spend your influence there instead. So it's just kind of this interesting tug and pull that kind of, I think, push these things.
We saw the low strength barriers and we're like, well, I guess then we just play Cleaver because they're low strength. But it turns out just playing Kurapira and saving some influence, that's just as good, if not better. So why not? It's sick. It's really good. Okay. Is there anything else we want to move up to an auto include? We have this huge chunk of Shaper cards coming up that are basically just the Arasana set. We could consider splitting them up, but there's maybe a couple cards that we could consider seeing an auto include. I think it's mostly the neutral card. Is that wrong? It's not exactly auto include, but it's worth looking at for just about every faction.
Yeah, maybe maybe it could go on the bottom of auto include. I feel if you don't especially as you're building first couple of drafts of a deck, I do think this is a card that you're going to want to think about putting in almost every deck. Because draw 2 cards and then install a card for 1 less. It's not a great effect, but it's just good enough to be often worth the influence. And then when you see assets around, it becomes a nice little asset tech. I don't think I've ever actually used, maybe I've used the anti-tag mode maybe twice.
It's important when it matters.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this card was like really hard to evaluate. Neutral influence. Again, I think we're mostly seeing it as a 3 of in like, well, it's weird. It's like every faction. Like Shaper can do well with it. Like we see it in Arasana lists to like speed that setup. We see it in criminals who also have access to cards like Chesva, so you can double dip on the value. And then like we're even seeing an Anarchs. It's just a bit more card draw to like, I don't know, cheat out an imp before you make a successful run. It's just kind of like it's a gap filler. It's like Deuce is Wild, but more interaction based, but it's a bit more nuanced. I'm kind of into the card. It's cool.
I think the other card people will want us to talk about as an auto include, though I'm still not on the this is an auto include train, is Wheels.
Oh, cool. I thought we were gonna talk about a different Enter card, but yeah, Wheels. I get it. Yeah.
I'm personally still quite skeptical of Wheels when I see it in a lot of decks. I think it needs to be a very particular set of board states and expectations that allow Wheels to be really good. Now that said, we are in fact in that meta where NEH is spamming is actually just going install every turn. And so yes, in this specific meta, Wheels is pretty good and you should probably run Wheels. But when I see people saying, oh no, Wheels is still good in the PD matchup, I'm going, no, you're going, I hear you, but I don't believe you. People have been saying, oh, you should always include this in an Anarch deck. I'm not 100% sure that's true. I think if you want an asset solution that involves playing around the assets, Wheels is going to go in your deck. To me, Wheels is still a little bit more of a role player, but a very strong role player.
Yes.
So definitely underrated in our list, but doesn't move up to auto include to me.
Yeah, it's cool that she also has life into other factions like deep dive decks. We see it as much as that's kind of a cheesy piece in there. And then like even in Shaper decks, like as a way to deal with remotes and say Arasana and get some more tempo back, it's nice. I could see us sliding it up to maybe here, maybe even a bit farther left.
Yeah, I'd be okay with moving her up by Arasana.
Cool.
I think.
Yeah, I'm down for that. And again, that's a big part is we saw a meta where there's a lot of assets. It's like was one of the big deck archetypes across multiple testing teams at the top of Worlds, where assets and specifically having clicks to remove tags is sometimes one of the most important things you can ask for. Okay. I thought you were going to say this card, and genuinely, I still don't know where I stand here, but this is Strike Fund. It's the click for 3 credits card unless you have additional support. But if you trash this off top of your stack, you gain, or from your hand, you gain 2 credits. And this card we've had actually now started to see like incredible amounts of play, to the point where because of the synergistic packages that it exists within, including some other cards we rated pretty low in this list, are showing up more consistently than some of the like kind of standard economy cards you see in a lot of packages. Things like Dirty Laundry and Sure Gamble. Sometimes you're seeing more strike funds in those sort of lists. There's also the sort of like Buffer Drive and Audrey packages and all that sort of stuff. To me, it's like it's a really, really good late game option. But I try and generally when I build Netrunner, build for early to middle game a bit more. But I'll be honest, man, I don't know if I even like this card still. I'm wrong, I think.
Yeah, I really like clickless 2 credits. The biggest challenge is it's a little bit random at when you get them. And so that's one of the hardest things about this card still is like, okay, I can get this random 2 credits at some point if I include enough trash synergies.
Yeah.
But if I, that does come at a cost. The decks that have been successful with Strike Fund so far are like pretty all in on getting Strike Fund value. And there's always that question of, well, what if we didn't play the Strike Fund and ran standard economy packages and then left the rest of the deck as is, are we in the same place or maybe even in a better place? And I don't think we have an answer to that yet.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, but I think we can say with definition that this is a strong build around card and that is worth including if you put the whole package. There's no way that we can argue ourselves out of that hole.
No, I don't. I completely agree.
I think it's more important than a bunch of these cards.
Yeah, that's fine. I was going to say, I think Pichasau is quietly one of the strongest Arasana cards, but I think it's fine to go there.
Okay. All right. Now we can go through our build arounds. This is a lot of very interesting conversation. I don't know if we can stop in exactly every single card. We can just slot some around. We have that Shaper package. So Arasana package of things like UAV, Urban Art Vernissage, and things like Lilypad, Pichashan, Slap Vendel. And all of the Shaper cards there see consistent play and almost entirely exclusively within Arasana. And they're the reasons why you play Arasana. I don't feel really strongly about moving those around, but like if Arasana sings, those cards sing, and they're quite important. As much as like Slap Vandal, it doesn't see as much play as some of the other ones, but I'd argue it's definitely still worth playing.
Yeah, I think people are wrong when they're cutting Slap Vandal and they're going for the more late game style engines. And it's one of the things that, like, as soon as I see some of those lists, they're like, oh yeah, we cut Slap Vandal for the 3rd SMC. I'm like, no, I'm going to make that swap right back. And the deck feels very me that way. And some of the other Arsenal players I've been chatting to are often making that kind of swap. So yeah, but nothing else to say on those packages.
Yeah. Cool. Next up, the badge. This was another card that seemed just like so universally good, especially if you're in an asset meta. But I haven't seen this in any deck, barring the decks that are like going out of their way to like have an imp every turn and to trash things every turn. Yeah. And in those decks, like, you know, if the engine fires, it's obviously very good. But I don't even know if I'd put this in a deck sooner than I'd put Hannah if I'm dealing with assets.
Yeah, I don't think this is asset tech. I think this is, to me, when I put this in build around, this is a build around where you're trying to make a trigger every turn. And then in that case, it becomes a 1 credit draw a card for a thing that's probably also winning you the game. So it's like a win more card, but a win more card in a way that's really like you need some amount of win more in your runner deck to actually go and win the game. And so to me, Solidarity Badge fit that role of this is an economic win more card, which can sometimes be a hard slot to land. But it comes in really cheaply. So I'm actually pretty happy with it sitting where it is, where it's a build around. It's not maybe the strongest built around, but it's there.
I was super surprised to see this as not like a one of in like, and maybe that's okay. It sounds more ridiculous once I say it out loud, but like seeing us potentially as a one of in this sort of like big Hoshiko decks where it's like, if you get this down in most matchups, they'll fire it like 3 or 4 times. Is that good enough? And the answer to that is clearly no. It's like clearly more of a build around than just like a generic value piece where you say like, I think 40% of the field is going to be assets. I'll just put it as a 1 influence in my criminal list, which yeah, that doesn't seem reasonable. So that's okay. It's at least a bit more specialized.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like, oh, at a certain point against an asset meta, you probably should be playing this as a one of because it will just draw you cards. But and often one of the ways that asset matchups win is like make you choose between developing your board or contesting theirs. And Solidarity Badge helps you do both. But you know, we haven't seen it manifest that way, and so presumably it's not going to, or we're once again very far ahead. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay, the next one's another big part of the trash forward thing, and that's Audrey V2. It's the AI. I know you had a lot of fun playing with this when we were doing our early tier list, and it's like such an interesting and cool card. And it's actually like a backbone fundamental card to a bunch of those econ packages we talked about, the sort of strike fund package. And like on its own, I think there's one card that like really makes me want to reevaluate this card, which is Cookbook. With Cookbook, whenever this card comes down, it comes in with a virus counter. And so like the corporation largely cannot stop you from breaking stuff if you spend enough Simo chips to get this back in over and over again. And on that basis, without requiring that much external support, you do have an engine here. What do you think about it? Because I don't even know if like that's a better virus engine than Amakua. The fact that like it is immune to purging with Simo chip is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I think the Simulchip Cookbook interaction to become immune to purging and also end up meaning that you don't need to actually run credits is really interesting for the deck, right? That's one of the things that makes it kind of unique and why I think a lot of people are really gravitating towards it is you get to ignore one part of the resource plan and move it to other parts. And that historically, like that was when Faust was at its strongest was, hey, I can use all these tools and ignore this one part of the game that my deck isn't like the card pool doesn't support as well. And so Audrey has a little bit of those vibes. I think it's kind of, it's cool to see it come back. I'm not sold that that deck is actually going to take over the meta per se, both because it's a high complexity deck and also I think it's a little bit too in its own way in some cases. But we'll see. I think there's good reasons to run it over Amakua. The biggest one being the breaking for free. That is like a difference, right, between the two. But you break for free in exchange for having to build your whole deck around it. So like I'm pretty happy with it and build around. And to me, it's actually kind of placed appropriately for the time being, and maybe we'll be wrong over time. But
I think it's only not placed appropriately because we haven't talked about the criminal cards yet, but we'll get to those criminal cards because
that's really what I'm saying is once we move all the criminal cards down a level, I think we'll be in a good spot. So
I would say no doubt though that this could probably go somewhere around here.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. I think we should probably just finish with Anarch. We should go faction by faction. It'll probably make a bit more sense. So in terms of other Anarch stuff to talk about, we have the very interesting banner. I've not played this. I played it once or twice. It's not worth it. I don't know. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I need to actually go and commit to playing that Banner Mercury deck that I talked about and then never built.
But like Kurapure is just better because like you get the bypass when you need it, hopefully, and then you still just have a better breaker you can spend 3 influence on. Like Kurapure is good enough for Mercury.
Yeah, it might just be that like that cycle of Banner, Umbrella, and Laser Pointer are just not great, and that's okay, right?
Yeah, you need some weapons, but I'm gonna say that one's like, oh boy, I don't know, something like that. This will move around obviously when we get to other stuff, but it definitely doesn't do what you want it to do.
Yep.
Then the other Anarch stuff is all at the bottom. This one is a card that actually sees consistent play. It is the Lago Piranha Shelter. Trash a card, draw a card, builds yourself something close to max. And again, it works synergistically with that Strike Fund package and all that sort of stuff. Fill your bin up, get your Simul chips, get another hand. Yeah, this card is like popping off modernly. You're seeing it pretty consistently across a lot of stuff, and it fires, it does draw a lot until the point in the deck where you have to stop hitting it because you're setting up a labor rates or something like that. I still don't know if I like it more than just playing Earthrise Hotel, but I feel like I got my own problems to deal with, man.
Yeah, it's hard to know how this does value versus Earthrise because obviously trashing cards has some value for has some value for the Anarch card pool right now, right? You've got basically 6 payoffs for that in your deck, plus maybe some Simul chip reaches and stuff like that.
Yep.
But I do kind of so like it's maybe belongs in build around, but it's definitely a build around. Yeah, like at the same time, I would not be surprised if it turns out that just replacing it with an Earthrise that you hit with a strike with the price is just going to be as good most of the time because you can just discard those cards later,
which is like a good spot. I think it's kind of a cool problem to have. Like the generic neutral card can like potentially be more expensive or more powerful than this. It's worth noting that since we recorded this last tier list, that NSG has announced that there's going to be a rotation of like old system update, and a lot of these like neutral like daily cast is going to go. Earthrise Hotel is going to go. And that might lead us with more options like this, which are like the draw package, but for a more synergistic deck. And I like that a lot better than just being like, is it better than daily cast? Is it better than Earthrise? Which unfortunately is what a lot of econ options like get compared to. So this is definitely a build around. Seems to be playable enough even at high levels. So yeah, we gotta move that up.
I would still put it up. Yeah, I would actually put it to the right. Well, to me, it's to the right of Solidarity Badge, but probably to the left, it's actually accurate for how crucial it is to the deck that is playing both of those. All
right. We have Iru. I've seen this card as a way to get out of all the board states that I'm losing in. And like, I'm kind of feeling it, but I've never played it yet because the numbers, this to me just was in that sort of page of revisit this in a couple months when the next part of the set comes out, because clearly we're missing something here. Have you played Iru yet?
No.
All right. Well, okay.
And same with the same with the last card that we have in the Anarch card pool, Monkey Wrench. Played Arasana. I have never once wanted to be like, oh man, it'd be great if I had a Monkey Wrench here. And if it's not going to be Arasana, I don't know who's going to want to play this.
It's like, so clearly Anarchs are running fixed strength breakers, which like want this, but then they're going out of the way to run sometimes both Takobi and Turbine. So the fixed strength breaker suite does have their weaknesses, but the way that those weaknesses are being dealt with seem to be obviously influence expensive, but a bit more elegant than potentially Monkey Wrench. Or just play Ice Carver, right? Like it can get tricky out there. Okay, that's Anarch. Overall, Anarch had a big synergistic package that like most parts of it are actually seeing play, and we're seeing a lot of trash forward decks. So overall, everything just kind of went up. As much as like Anarch won Worlds, the Anarch that did win Worlds was like, the most reg of all Anarchs you could expect.
Yeah, the Anarch that won Worlds touched maybe the price, and I think nothing else on the, maybe he wheels as well, and nothing else on from the new cards. So
it's playing the Boomerang and it's really good still. So like, I'm not too surprised, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we can do Shaper stuff because there's not too much more to say. I think I don't have huge opinions about like the mid-range build around Arasana stuff. The slots are hard stuff. I think we actually can be more critical about a bunch of stuff that just doesn't make any sense to me now 3 months later. And I want to start here with, go ahead.
No, you got it. You're doing the lead in, so. Sorry.
We have a living mural here, and as much as I have some really nice acrylic frog tokens to use, I just still don't see why Shaper would spend this much effort on a late game breaker suite when we have access to things like Turbine and Takobi and Faction. This seems like a lot of effort, and the payoff is not that much better than just getting a late game echelon with some amount of support. I don't know if I'd ever play this.
from my perspective, this card only makes sense once all the FFG cards are gone. So we lose to Kobe. And then we get a turbine ban for whatever reason. Not saying that's actually in the works, just like a thing that I could see happening. And now all of a sudden 5 strength sentries are a pain to get through for anyone. And now suddenly this card makes some amount of sense.
And even if you play an all sentry deck, which is where the living mural kind of succeeds, like you can still just get through it by turbining enough echelons and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if I play this, man. This goes down.
Yep. I think we can move a lot of these Shaper cards into the binder, or at least a couple of them.
Yeah. Next up is Joyride. Like, I'm still convinced that this is one of the cards that is better than the amount of play it sees. It's just like the deck around it doesn't exist, because you don't want to play this on turn 1. You maybe want to play it on turn 2. That's an absurd effect. It is a bit too much influence to consider splashing, but I have no doubt there's going to be some wild ghost tongue engine or something that makes this make sense, because this is genuinely a good card that nobody wants. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's definitely a card without a home. It's got some challenges as well, but I think this card to me like feels like it's waiting for the support to come out, and the support that it needs is like more run-based Shaper kind of stuff that has a little bit of like a different econ engine than Arasana is running. And I would be a little surprised if NSG was not continuing to try and make Shapers run. And so I expect this card will eventually see support. That's why I'm pretty happy leaving it in slots are hard.
Yeah, it's fundamentally what it does is interesting, and there's nothing else that does it. I want to play it at some point. Now, it's like weird, because on that same note, this is a very interesting Shaper card that does something that the faction wants, doesn't have access to, is like Beatrice. And Beatrice is very expensive. 3 clicks before we're doing anything. And then we're seeing 2 cards on top of R&D. We probably mentioned that when we talked about this before, but the idea of the Shaper you ice up R&D, you ice up the remote server, you leave HQ 1 iced, let them suffer with an architect there, or sorry, a drafter, excuse me. That's generally good enough, but I don't know. I'm like not ready to let go of Beatrice, because I think what it does is genuinely interesting, as much as it might be like just play DJ Fenris if you need HQ pressure and Shaper.
Yeah, I just kind of look at this and go, well, Iru is clearly like a setup for next set, and Beatrice does not seem like a setup for next set in a clean way to me. And if it's not going to see play now, I struggle to see what deck is going to want a spend 3 clicks to see 2 cards in R&D effect. But you know, if you want to leave, I don't think.
No, you're right.
Like,
you're right. By definition, it has to go at least there, if not even lower.
Yeah.
It's just what it does is really cool. It's just the way it does it is so seemingly so expensive that I wouldn't consider it.
Yeah, I know we said we weren't going to do a lot of changes, and we felt pretty good about our side. We're moving a lot of things around, but I feel like they're all like pretty small moves. I think the corpse side we're going to be making some really big
it's messed up
fluctuations.
Over there,
yeah,
we've made some mistakes. Airblade. I'm surprised to see how low this thing is. It has like no actual meta relevance right now. It's worth noting that like the Shaper that classically saw play in the last 3 months was Arasana, and Arasana will use Hush more than she will use Airblades. That being said, this is a really good card for a certain meta. Like if you have to deal with fun houses all the time, this card is an absurd amount of value. I've seen people use it more often than not just to be like, I want to play down Banhar and not have to think too much about it, which like for one influence, you could do worse than that. But it's like, it definitely is seeing more consistent play than any of the other slots or hard cards down here.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to shift it over, like it could be up below Shibboleth, I guess. That's technically how much play it's seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. The last Shaper card I think to talk about is Umbrella. I think I don't want to move this card out of slots are hard, because I think people will continue to work on. Someone will figure this card out. I hope. I really, really hope. I think it's a cool breaker. Breaking with upside is like such a Shaper color pie thing, even though it's not actually that common on their breakers. But man, it's a hard card to play.
But that's like the problem right now is like, why would I go out of my way to build a 2-card package, which is Umbrella plus a Trojan, when I can just play Buzzsaw plus Turbine and then just break all code gates at 5 strength for 1 credit and not have to give the corp card draw? Like that's the problem again with the Frog too. It's just like, I'm jumping through hoops. My hoop could just be play a Turbine. You tell me if that means Turbine's a good card or not, but like, yeah.
I guess to me, the difference is like, I struggle to see a world where Beatrice and Living Mural are going to see any play. I could see a deck that makes Umbrella worth the effort, I guess.
Okay. I'll give you this one. Yeah. Okay. Where do you want to put it?
I would just leave it where it is. Very bottom of slots are hard, I think is a good place to be.
Cool. And that like ends with Shaper, and like the majority of Shaper was built around and then original Arasana excitement. And we're in the same spot we were 3 months ago. It's still really fun and still really cool, as much as people have cooled down because they realize it's a tricky deck to play, and Corps have some understanding how to play against it, which definitely isn't going to help the deck.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Criminal, just to finish this off, we had a new ID. It was Mercury. They want to get through some ice and not break subroutines, maybe bypass, derez, and C2 cards. Criminal popped off at Worlds, right? Like people were playing Criminal and playing aggression, getting those axes as soon as possible, getting those clickbacks from Sable. We didn't really see Zaya, but she was kind of in the shadows somewhere. And it's just like a really good way to deal with some of those acid decks, to deal with that HB decks, the HB decks that can ice up centrals. They want to build a remote server. It feels really good and really fun to play. And I don't know how big Mercury was in the conversation. Like I even heard Ken seeing a bit more aggressive testing than Mercury. I haven't enjoyed my time with Mercury so far.
I have enjoyed my time with Mercury, but I think what I discovered was I enjoyed playing early multi-access aggressive Crim, and it turns out like CTZ kind of inspired the like, let's just go back to playing multi-access again, right? We can play multi-access if we want to, and it's just fun and it's good and it's very strong, and it's just better to do that in Sable or 419 or Zaya or Ken. And so you just like Mercury is just too low on that list because you don't need the two accesses that early compared to like getting a twinning and a wake down. You've got time to set up for that, and that ends up. And if that's the case, then you can have an actual ID ability. Which is kind of the downside here. I think Mercury is still going to be kind of on the edge of playable, but is always going to be one of the weaker Crim IDs.
I think I'm gonna drop one again. I also do think it's like totally worth noting is that there are just issues inherently with Mercury. If you're too aggressive and the ice gets rezzed, your ability is less relevant. So then you have to either have bypass or derez, and then suddenly you're building a lot more cards into a deck, and that kind of threatens the fundamentals that the criminal card pool is like, I guess, relatively good, but there's not too many diverse ways to solve issues. So come maybe the next part of the set where we see a couple more bypass, a couple more derez cards, I think I'd be a bit more excited to play Mercury, because right now it's really hard to put all the cards that Mercury needs to do Mercury's thing while also still playing good fundamentals.
Yeah, the success I've had with Mercury has been one of those derez decks, but it's like, okay, I have to choose between daily casts and my derez cards, and that's it's like, oh, but if I just, that's why, it's like, oh, that's a choice you don't want to have to make. And obviously pinches deck building.
Yeah, I'd be so stoked if there's some like Virus Max type deck where you put a bunch of stuff together that doesn't resemble a deck, and it turns out it's so synergistic, it's worth doing. So we got to hold on for that. On that note, Estebrado, there was 2 threat cards in Criminal. This I saw no play.
Yeah, I think it's, it's a Mercury card. Like you could maybe see it in Sable sometimes for like really committing to a deep dive, because you'll still have the clicks to play it after you resolve this, but it's just better to play Inside Job, right?
Yes. And we now know Inside Job will rotate next year. So like this was always seen as the next Inside Job, the next Boomerang that you can consider after playing all of these, even arguably the next Backstitching in some cases. And for that case, it will have a better future than it has now. But I don't think I'd play it in any Criminal besides Mercury until that point. And then maybe. This has to go lower.
Yeah. I put it below. Yeah, Pine Joyride, I think, feels right before we do some other moving around.
Okay. Other stuff I'm going in through order. Capybara. Haven't really seen it. Obviously, Mercury's synergy. Is this better than Backlund Botchkin? I don't even know.
Yeah, I've still enjoyed Capybara, and again, if we get more derez support, I feel like it's going to be a reasonable include. It's probably a little bit weaker than it could have been, right? Like you could imagine a lot of ways you could boost the power of this without actually forcing it into play, but it's fine. Maybe it's going to stay in the binder forever, but I feel like at some point, if we see more bypass support, it will sneak in as a 1 or 2 of in some Crim decks.
Yeah, if you ever get like I don't know, I don't think we're going to see it because we saw Hermes, but if you see like a security nexus type console, like a bypass type console, so you can use bypass on your terms, this seems really, really good at that point. But unfortunately,
I mean, I've even comboed this with like I've comboed it with backstitching to some actual real success, because then you get to turn a one-time bypass effect into a more permanent economic advantage, which is like kind of a cool criminal kind of gameplay. So I'm pretty happy to leave this in slots are hard, because it's kind of, bypasses as a whole, as a deck, is in a slots are hard place, not as in a, we think it's never going to be any good, maybe.
It's like wild. The deck, the One World, was playing like 10 strength barriers. You'd love to bypass those with Kurapira. In fact, that's a really big play pattern. But on the other side, some of the decks that were in top 16 of Worlds are running 3 ice. That's maybe an okay spot to be Mercury, but I'd argue in that matchup, you'd rather be some of the other criminals. But like, that's, again, it's a hard thing. If we're going horizontal, there's only so much ice, and you don't want to be derezzing pings, let me tell you.
I think that is the thing to figure out with Mercury to make it work, is like, okay, I can build on my deck to deal with ice, but then I also need to be ready for the matches where there's no ice, where I should have some natural ID advantage, but for some reason it hasn't manifested yet. So
speaking of that, laser pointer, it's another bypass stuff. It has good text on it. It's also, I think we sometimes saw this as a text slot, but I'm pretty sure flip switch existed in more cases as a way to deal with like Stavka half run and like some really gross reses. I don't know how you feel about this, or just playing even another revolver.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's been like, I've not, like, people will play revolver or flip switch, and that's just kind of completely subsumed the need for this card. But
okay,
I don't know.
It's fine. It's fine. There is 2 cards that I think are going to have relatively big changes. One of them is Saucy, which I'm no longer Rubicon pilled. It's not, that's not a deck. It's not, it doesn't work, and everyone's happy about it. I think we can bring the bird down a fair bit.
Yeah, I think it can go to slots are hard, because I think it would see play in some Arasana decks, but slots are too hard. Like, it is quintessentially like, if you could have this appear in your hand, it would be great in a lot of board states, but it's just dead in your hand just often enough to not actually be something you want to bring in.
Okay, and last card, I think we were a bit harsh on this one, because this card is definitely on the cusp of playable, which is Debbie down to Moreira. It's genuinely okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd feel bad playing it. I'd feel okay.
Yeah, I think it's, we've been mentioning Ken a couple of times. I might even put it at the very bottom of build around to me.
Cool.
I think like there's a deck that exists because of Debbie, and you built it around Debbie being in the card pool, where you just make sure that you can trigger Debbie, and then Debbie will charge up your twinning. And that's basically the pitch for the deck, right?
I was going to say you can buy bands on it, but you can't. No, you get you twinning on it, which is really nice. And it helps you deal with assets. There's a lot of like weird kind of interactions that this helps you across a lot of matchups more than it looks.
Yeah.
Okay. This hasn't changed too much. And I'm saying that because you're going to see the corpse side in a second. We have a lot of explaining to do. But nothing we saw here was too surprising. I think our learning points was the Anarch package of playing all of these cards that to me were underwhelming. Putting them together seems to be reasonable enough, and that has been proven to be the case. Seeing the Hermes action go up and down and the Arsena action go up and down throughout the last 3 months has been an absolute roller coaster. And then there's just like a lot of, I think, shaper stuff that just feels like so poorly comparable to just playing like, I guess I'm going to play Turbine and a Breaker, and it just kind of.
Yeah, I think maybe we slept on Turbine a little bit. And so all the stuff that kind of competes with Turbine just says, no, I'm a one-stop shop for all your answers. But
cool. How'd you like Runner so far since this thing has come out?
Runner's side's been a lot of fun in a way that I feel like a lot of previous Runner metas have been like, okay, I need to figure out how I can get to the lock state and then just kind of hold the corp in a headlock. And now Runner is a lot more about like, okay, I'm going to set up a multi-access engine. Like almost every runner is actively trying to win the game in some manner rather than just stop themselves from losing the game. I think for a variety of reasons, but that's my kind of preferred runner style. I think both it fits the flavor of the game and the feeling of the game a lot better. So this has been a great runner set for me. And I actually think we moved a lot of cards, but not very much, and kind of almost within a bounds of what I think is normal for basically everything.
Yeah, I don't think I would have realized that, but you're totally correct. Now, more so when I'm playing Netrunner, and now in general with runners are trying to win the game. And I love that, right? Like we used to have those metas where it's like a 419 deck with no multi-access, and it's just like, hang on. They're going to have a bad time for 35 minutes until you finally win. Like, oh, we're so far past that, which is like really, really cool. And I definitely appreciate that.
Gone are the days of LoseCon 419. May they rest in peace and never come again. So
now on that note too, speaking about like having a win condition, I also think Corp has been really good for that. There's been a lot of like every faction we basically saw in the top cut of worlds, and there's multiple win conditions and they all seem like very, very reasonable to pursue. And that's going to lead us to this, salad of a Corp page where again, we got some talking to do. Why don't we start at the top? Let's start with HB in general. I think doing it by faction makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah. So
we had 2 Ban Me Please cards, and they were both 2 cost barriers that came in at 1 strength. Okay, so the first HB one we have to talk about is, of course, Ablative Barrier. This thing rated really, really high because everything that it's doing is kind of good. On its own, paying a 1 credit premium to get an Ice Wall that ends the run in the early game, fantastic. So much Netrunner was like, get Rashida turn 1 and ace a group and then go from there. That's still largely relevant, but that line actually feels kind of bad to play right now. And then from that point forward, we have Recursion attached to like weird instant speed run tricks with, ace a group or whatever stuff. And classic Recursion in Corp side has been kind of a miserable win condition that's hard to deal with. If you run this at the wrong time, it can cost you the game. But as much as possible, we actually haven't seen that to be the case. I don't think I've ran into an Ablative Barrier at a point in the game where it's been like, oh crap, that's cost me the game. As much as it's been like, oh, that's probably not good. They have a wage workers again, which is like kind of interesting because I thought it'd be different. I think we might want to take a second here to address threat, because threat showed up on a couple cards we saw on the last runner side, but like honestly, that text really didn't matter much on runner cards in a really weird way. And I think there's a couple of reasons why that is. I think corps are generally under control of threat. Like any card that says threat 3 on it, and there's some really powerful ones, like the corp can just put a 5/3 on the table and just say like, we're going to be on threat 3 next turn. Like, what are you going to do about it? And runners, it's kind of random where you get there, right? So the threat cards have been like nice kickers, or technically in some cases they've been bad for you, but I don't know. I almost forgot that runners got threat cards in the set.
Yeah, it is kind of wild how little impact runner threat has had. It's a little bit disappointing. But that said, I think HB also got the short end of the threat stick. I think all of their threat cards are not worse because of the threat, but like the threat just doesn't make them that interesting. I think Ablative Barrier is probably the exception of being an interesting threat card. I think actually HB is a little bit sad that this is threat 3 and not like threat 2. If this was threat 2, I think it would be astounding for HB. But like HB has this thing where right now their agenda suite is often like 2 5/3s and then all X2s, which makes the Ablative Barrier sometimes not come online until the game's about to end.
And then you don't want to play a lot of these because it's like at the point of the game where this matters, you're going to lose the game in one axis potentially. Like I totally feel you. Threat 3 on this card, as much as we didn't see threat 2, is a huge difference for a deck that doesn't functionally have 5/3s they want to play that many of.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I think that said, every time I'm building an HB deck, like I'm like, oh, I need to put some barriers in. I've got 2 border controls. I'd like one more. And I don't have the money for brand. Okay, well, this just goes right in, right? So I think it's not a ban me, please, but I do think it ends up being an auto include for HB just because it's the best. It's a best in slot for cheap barrier with upside, which is, we thought recursion was going to be broken. I think it turns out threat 3 for HB in particular is a little bit trickier. And it's not quite, maybe this is in part because of the Keeling ban and stuff like that, where like some of the most powerful kind of recursion that you could do, corpse side got toned down quite a bit. That also probably had a little bit of an influence on how this card ended up landing. But
yeah, 3 is just such a strange number, right? Like you said it. And for what it's worth, a lot of the decks, 3-pointers are so important when it comes to competitive Netrunner. You just see any of the decks that have good 3-pointers are generally going to be good factions, like just period. That's kind of how it works. And unfortunately, like HB hasn't been defined by 3-pointers in the history of the game, unless you want to count Global Food Initiative. So it just doesn't make sense. And I'll be honest, I don't like 3-pointers in the game. I don't like decks that run all the 3-pointers they can. So it's weird. I don't know. It's like threat 2 sounds like such a low number, but I'd kind of rather have that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's tricky. The next card on our tier list, I think, probably could move up. One of our first move ups.
This is the best card in the set.
Workers. Yeah.
It's the best card in the set, period.
Yeah. No, it 100% is the best card in the set. This is Wage Workers. It's, as I call it, just a Jeeves. And then everyone said, no, Jeff, it's not just a Jeeves. It's so much better because being active the turn you install it is such a big deal. And yeah, that's just like being one click faster on paying off or doing a combo or, whatever is what you want. And Jeeves delivers real nicely there. So, or not Jeeves, Wage Workers.
Yeah. So I was also a bit colored because when we saw Jeeves was this alliance card. So you could include it into your deck for 0 influence if you played enough HB cards. And so you saw Jeeves out of action consistently in any asset spam deck because, mind you, back at the time when Jeeves was allowed, there was a lot of like low influence HB cards that were really good in asset spam. And so I thought, like, are you going to spend 6 influence for this ability when Jeeves was free? I thought people will walk away from that. But like, the answer is no. This card shows up as a 3-of in every faction at the top level because just having a 4-click, a 5-click turn with other click compression is one of the best things you can do as a corporation. It opens up scoring patterns, it opens up combo lines, it opens up literally everything you want to do in any deck. And at the end of the day, the runner trashes it for more than you've rested it for. Like, it's so absurdly good.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does play a little differently in every corp. And like the influence cost is real. Like you see some of the decks that would love to play, like would 100% play Jeeves if they could because they have the purple cards, like are struggling and maybe only playing 2 Wage Workers just so they can fit in other key packages from out of faction. But I don't know. While this is a Ban Me Please card, it's also one that I'm still really excited about and like really glad it's in the game. So this is a Ban Me Please positive. Like.
But no, the card's absolutely buck wild. It's really, really good.
Yeah.
Okay. Another card. This is the next in order on our tier list, which is Vovo Azeti, threat 4. Technically, I don't think I've ever seen that text be relevant, but it saves you money. And econ for HB is really weird, man. It's really strange. Have you tried to put econ in an HB deck? It's like 3 Nico campaigns and then end of sentence. Like, I don't know what to do.
Nico Tranquility Grid. Oh God, I've run out. Like, and so I think Vovo still has a niche in that world. I think people have not been playing much Vovo. I have to eat crow on that one a little bit. But is that But I think it's still a solid card, and I think I'm expecting we'll see a little bit more of it over time. I think it does enable some really powerful stuff, and like. While it's not in any of my op versions right now, it was correct in that version in that time in meta stuff like that. Like it's a card that has uses, and I have gotten value out of the threat 4 effect. Not a ton, obviously. It's hard to get a ton, but the threat 4 does feel more like a kicker bonus if you draw this late, rather than this is why you play the card. You play the card because you want to res a gatekeeper for 1 credit, which is a fun effect. I might just like it in my convention. I would almost swap it with the next card we're going to talk about to me in terms of meta, in terms of like where they stack up.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. The next card is actually super, super, super cool. But I just want to say, because like I know I mentioned this a bit earlier when we were talking, but I've played an HB deck with 3 Vovo in it. That's just about jamming in the remote server as soon as possible. And like 3 Vovo sounds wrong. He's unique. He's not that important. But if you're trying to build a deck that's like trying to get 2 ice on a remote server as soon as possible, the Vovo is genuinely really good because it becomes a 3-credit econ card on a minimum that you install for no clicks, and then you move it to R&D because it will survive the first assault. And there, if you're trying to push the envelope as quickly as possible, be a jammy deck, I've actually liked it more than a lot of other economy cards in the deck because it just does the one thing that you're very good at. Having really good face checks really early to res now for only 1 credit. That means it's hard to stop you from like, that's the big problem with HB is they run your remote server turn 1, you res like the next card we're going to talk about, and you have no money once they pinhole the Rashida and the game's over, right? Like it's really good when your whole game plan is about force them into the ice as soon as possible. And I've appreciated 3x Vovo as much as that like feels super, super wrong, but you just don't have better options.
That's really interesting. I haven't thought about him that way, and I'm going to have to try him as a more higher card count in PD because if you get him early, he is actually going to do a lot to stabilize your econ. It's not that hard to get, like, as you said, you'll probably get 4 credits out of him on the remote and then probably another 2 to 4 out of him on R&D. And suddenly you're like, wait, that's some of the best econ cards you can put in slot. Like that's a fully operational worth of value. So that's pretty cool.
It's so weird because he's unique. So you don't want 3 of, but the only good time to really get Vovo is turn 1 in your opening hand. So like, play 3 and
Yeah.
hopefully he does enough. But yeah, it's weird. I've liked it more than I thought it would, but I only liked it when I played as many of them that like doesn't make sense anymore. But
Yeah.
I agree. HP economy is a weird spot to be in. Okay. Something like that for now.
Yeah. For now.
Okay. Next one, the big one, MIC, the really big enigma. You face check into this as a runner. It feels really bad, but then also the corporation had to res this on turn 1. Feels really bad for them too. That being said, they got ice for the rest of the game. That's good. I think this ice is really good. It's just like very solid. Yeah. No one deals with it exceptionally well.
Yeah, I think it's really good right now because it is extremely difficult. Like if the runner gets Buzzsaw Turbine, they can break this for 2 credits, which is still like pretty good, but they've now spent 2 credit. They spent 8 credits of upfront to install that, and you'll still get a border control style kicker event effect on this card. So it's just, to me, it's got a ton of upside, and I suspect we're going to see its play only increasing as we play more, because it turns out to just be like, yeah, the double enigma effect is really strong.
It's like I always say, turn 1, if the HB deck puts something in the remote server, you just face check it because it's a Hagen or a Gatekeeper, a Magnet. Like none of that stuff matters on turn 1. And now this is the one thing to upset us. So it's like harder to, for some reason, to afford than like that Fairchild 3 from like years ago. It doesn't feel, in some ways, the face check is very similar, but yeah, no, it's good. It's genuinely good ice.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of genuinely good ice, the Jaguar has threat 4 text. That's kind of rough. Gives a runner a tag, which is a nice face check, and they do a core damage, which is something that's only relevant in a subsection of HB decks. And then I thought we might see this in NBN decks, but it turns out the Reality Plus decks that you're going to expect this in have no reason to play this over the options they have in faction. As much as that threat 4 text, I don't think I've ever seen fire, but that being said, if it did fire, I wouldn't know what to deal with it. Like, it is annoying. Nobody plays this.
Yeah, I think this, like, we put this at the bottom of build around with the idea that maybe there's going to be some, I think as you said, we initially thought, oh, maybe NBN can splash it because getting a core damage allows you to set up an end of the line kills a little bit easier. But it turns out, why bother with any of that? You've got other tools in this set to help you land kills. And so to me, this card just moves right down. The slots are hard and probably pretty far down, honestly. I struggle to see a world where maybe there's going to be more Thule core damage HB support, but this set already feels like it has quite a bit. And I don't know.
Yeah, I'm interested to see if it lines up with whatever the HB identity is. But you're right. It's like, seems like a Thule card, and Thule has had its own issues. And I think it's the sort of thing I'd be excited to revisit once HB economy becomes a bit more steadfast, because currently it's like really difficult to play Thule because you just don't have the money to back up whatever the heck it is you're doing. Okay. Speaking of economy, palms to be greased. It's lateral growth. That's an old card. Install, gain 2 credits. It has tag text on it, which is kind of cool to have in faction, albeit you kind of need a deck that like can capitalize on that, which means you're scoring out 3 2s unless you're getting tempo and you're not really tagging an HB, and you don't want to import this because it's 3 influence. And I don't know.
I mean, I think we got this one basically right on the money. Like, I think other cards are going to move around it, but it's well evaluated. I will say it's an eternal powerhouse for those of you who enjoy that format. And I think there's probably worlds where this could, if we end up with some kind of CI combo deck, like, this would be okay. Having an install effect card is good, but I think we also put this as like maybe Sports Metal could play this. But Sports Metal just seems so dead for a variety of, people going back to multi-access actually like had destroyed Sports. It was like Sports was a call against people playing like LoseCon 419, right? A deck that has no way to win, but just deny. And Sports says, oh, well, you can't deny me. But now it's like, oh, every runner can just get 18 accesses before Sports can score out. So,
or like Knobcurie Imp is everywhere. It's like, ooh, it's really hard to play Sports right now. But combo Sports on that card alone is really fun. So it is. It's interesting, but not interesting enough. We're left with 2 agendas. One is Stegadon that has a lot of text on it, and people played Stegadon, and Stegadon does something that is incredibly cool. It is cool. it is hard to, I'd argue that like it's actually okay, hold on. There are Stegadon prisons that I've been in, which like the right play is to concede the game because it has gone to the point that it's almost impossible to deal with. Generally, that's tag-based strategies. Maybe some big bloops or something like that's a real issue. I've seen the Forma carry stuff. I'd argue that is like you can just end the run and come back, and then the Stegadons don't do enough. Obviously, it messes up your scoring pattern because you have to score at a 3-1, and then your agenda is in a really awkward spot. But it's definitely a cool card. It's just not consistent.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. So it's like, to me, I might like you could make a case for this going in build around, but like I actually say I think it goes in slots are hard because we're talking about this from a competitive perspective. And what we saw in all of the competitive events in the season is people said, "Oh man, I got this Stegadon deck. It did really well at my CO," and then they just never showed up in the big events really. And I think that ends up happening not because the ceiling of the Stegadon deck is not very high, but because Stegadon imposes a lot of slot restrictions on the deck construction itself, and so it loses consistency and it loses right in a way that other options that you can play don't. And so it does end up being like if I could get this effect on a different card, I would, but I can't get it. And so I'm just not going to play this card. I'm going to play a more efficient card in slot. And so it ends up being slots are hard in a way that's a little bit maybe different from some of the other ones, but I think still kind of where I would land on it.
I think one thing that made me underevaluate this card very significantly was the misunderstanding that the integer strength of breakers goes negative. Because we talked about like, and you don't actually see this that commonly, but like harmonic ice, like cards like Echo, which you really do want to res and derez, that comes in at 0 strength. So like decreasing the strength of a fractor doesn't matter, but it turns out it does because you actually can get a cleaver to like -4 strength, and then it has to boost to even break like an Echo. I think that's really neat and makes this card more powerful than it looked like, especially very early on before I understood that ruling. But I do agree with you. It has a lot of restrictions on the deck itself, and you're playing a lot of agendas, and I don't know, Hermes is around. It's not the easiest.
Yeah.
I would raise it up though, because I've seen functional decks more than I've seen like
you could probably
with the
put it
Jaguar.
up past greasing the yeah.
I would do here. Oh, yeah, we'll move this one around too. It's its own.
Yeah. Well, that one's going to move as well. Maybe not. I don't even know. But
we only have one more HB card. It's a 5/3. It's salvo testing. I have no additional notes.
Yep, no notes.
Cool. HB is okay. It's good.
Yeah,
People are still playing the same We did fine.
Yeah.
People are still playing the same HB deck from like 2020, right? Like the like a system gateway anoetic special on PD is like coming to Worlds and getting top 16. So like seems fine. I mean, it's hard to challenge that.
That deck is just like all fundamentals, and it's going to take a lot of cards rotating, and a lot of the cards that are key to it are gateway cards. So it's going to take that deck's going to be with us forever, I think, for a given value of forever.
Cool. Okay, let's go on to some Jinteki cards. Jinteki is like always the hardest to evaluate because Jinteki is just kind of strange. It's hard to design for Jinteki because it represents like abstractly a Glacier deck, abstractly a Rush deck, obviously some damage and some prison type decks. Like we saw some wild stuff. We saw some really big bans since I think we did our last tier list. I believe since then the Doctor got banned, Vientian Keeling.
Yeah.
So Jinteki is like fundamentally in a different place and actually has to pursue different win conditions. Let's start with Atea. It didn't pop off.
No, it had a centrals problem, and you know it's like if it had come out last release, it may not have had a centrals problem, but because every runner is packing centrals pressure, it's just like losing every game. Like it's kind of wild. Maybe not every game, but it's losing quite a bit. I think Saka did some interesting stuff with Fast Advance.
Yes.
But, you know, if you want to play Fast Advance, you can just play it in a proper Fast Advance faction and be in a good spot in most cases.
So like, I still refuse to believe that the text on this is not going to make something absurd in the future with enough card support. And like, maybe the fact that we didn't start talking about Tattoo Bolo, which is like one of our Ban Me Please cards, kind of buries the lead here. Which is like Jinteki has two issues right now. It has an economy issue where kind of like HB, it kind of has to go out of its way to play some economy that is like not too elegant. It feels a bit more difficult and expensive to play. But then on top of that, name a Jinteki Ice that costs less than 4 credits that you're happy to put in your deck. Right?
I
Like
mean,
HB, it's like literally every ice in the deck is like tempo positive on the first turns. And then it's like you have Tattoo Bola, you have Thimble Rig, and a Writ List. Like it's
and
hard to
I'm
build
not
a
even that happy the
deck.
rest of Thimble Rig anyway. Like
Yeah.
it's just
It's
a 2
fair.
cost and the run. Like, yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, no, I think Jinteki got done a little dirty by this release, and just did not get as much as we thought they did.
Yeah. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to get some of your fundamentals down and do the interesting Atea stuff when it's like you're kind of gear checked. Well, not gear checked, but you're gated by the economy issues. You're gated by the fact that all your good ice is really expensive and that slows you down, so you can't go quick. You don't have in faction tempo positive agendas that are worth anything. So it's like hope the off-world offices are good. It's hard out there, y'all.
Yeah.
It's not even a build around.
I think that's a little cruel.
It's like there's cool decks that are only Atea specific, like all the fast advance stuff. It's like genuinely really neat, but it's like I don't know if it's worth doing over any of the other fast advance decks across other factions.
I might still leave it at towards the bottom of build around.
Okay, let's go there. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll have other cards that are falling multiple levels. Yeah. All
right. The other bad me, please. It cost 2 credits to get an end the run in Jinteki that you were happy to res, let alone when they passed it, you got money, let alone swap is install. Tattoo Bola was just that, that oasis in the middle of a desert where we were just looking for a functional ice so we could play in Jinteki, and we got it. Is it popping off as hard as Ban Me Please category? No. But I'd argue it's because nobody's playing Jinteki, so we don't have enough data points. And like the players who play this in ASIC group probably could spend their 2 influence. Like it's fine. It's not bad. I just don't think it makes that deck. But like, this card's good because it's like a really good card. It's the perfect card for the problem Jinteki has. But the problem is there's still a Jinteki problem.
Yeah, it's a partial solution to a faction that needs a holistic solution. And the holistic solution is not here yet, so this card's not here yet, basically. I think we were pretty high on the swap to install with ASA interaction. We were like, there was a lot of concern that was actually going to like break ASA in some really powerful ways, and it just turns out that you can just play straight up ASA and do better. Or like, it's like, oh, I could run 2 Tattoo Bolas or 1 Anoetic Void, and 1 Anoetic Void is probably do more for me than having 2 extra credits on my barrier slot. So to me, this is still an auto include. I think literally every Jinteki deck is going to run this until the end of time, or until it rotates, I should say. But it's and it's definitely, I think you're right. It is definitely better than a Ablative Barrier, but yeah,
it's more important. It's so good that it's a low cost card that actually gives you money. Like, Jinteki wants that hand over fist, if that's what that expression even means. Okay. Atini, though, I'm very surprised to see we put this high on the list. I do not remember doing that. I don't remember that.
This has to have been this feels like a mistake that I made, and to me, this is like one of the cards that's actually I'm like, this goes almost all the way down, I think. Because like Vampira Nessa is just better than this in every circumstance.
I did not like Vampira Nessa. Go back and watch some of the old tier lists. I didn't like Vampira Nessa. And admittedly, back then we had, DNA Tracker, which is a messed up card. Glad it's gone. But Vampira Nessa now is like one of my favorite ice because it's just so good for so many reasons. A lot of subroutines, enough strength. I res it for 5 credits. That's a steal in Jinteki. And this thing is expensive. And I do want to shout out, unfortunately, the threat text on this is so forgettable. I don't even remember it's there, which like unfortunate. But I don't want to res this.
I guess it's meant to be that the strength 5 is like a thing you care about, but I think in practice you don't. And strength 4 on Vampira Nessa is good enough to deal with all of the decoders you care about. And that has more relevant subroutines on res. So to me, this goes in the binder. Like, it's technically probably slots are hard because it's just strictly subsumed by another card, but it's so strictly subsumed that I think it's going to live in the binder up until like Borealis rotates.
I wouldn't go that hard because this card did see play at top tables because we saw it as like an option in the sort of like Restoring Humanity punitive lists that are running 3 Anansi, 3 Vampire Anasa, and then they were still playing probably like 2 Atini, just because that deck needs as much like annoying stuff for the runner to deal with. That this card did see consistent play. It's just like it's not the card I want sooner for any Jinteki deck I'm building, besides the one that says like I need, like it's the sort of deck that would in theory consider playing Blindsy, which is like we just need more cards that say big numbers on them.
Yeah, that's fair. So slots are hard, probably.
It's technically play. I think it's playable in a subsection of decks.
Yeah, I think that's actually somewhat consistent with slots are hard. Like the description you're describing is like, oh, this deck ran out of other alternatives, and that's like close to a slots are hard to me.
Yeah, maybe the folks playing those decks are actually really happy playing it because the numbers on there are not too bad. It's just like most of the Jinteki kill decks that you see modernly, that's not exactly the way they're going. Besides the punitive ones that are, beefing up stuff.
Well, they can let us know in the comments, right? That's
Yeah. There's always the template below to make your own tier list as well. That will be linked. Adrian Seiss, still a lot of text on it. 3 months later, I'm still not convinced. I know exactly what happens on each of the win or lose cases. I think if they win, he goes.
So it's if they match, you access the other cards. If the runner wins, they access the other cards. If they lose, they access him. We've been playing a lot of this.
More often works.
Yes, he more often kind of throws himself on the in front of the runner.
The breach.
Yeah, and I actually think he's pretty solid. Like he's a one-shot Anoetic Void, but he's often cheaper than an Anoetic Void, so that's often all you need. I've been pretty impressed with him, to be honest. I think we got him basically right in my perspective. He's a strong build around in a faction that's not doing very well. And I think we'll see a lot more of him as Jinteki gets more powerful.
We see more Anoetic Void because we're seeing Anoetic Void out of faction. If you want to spend 4 influence on Seiss or Anoetic, I would play the Anoetic over it. And we see that time and time again. I do think once we have Jinteki Glacier, this is more interesting. I'm also surprised we haven't seen his text be entirely relevant where you can have other traps. So like if you run this, you take a Hokusai damage, but then you can't trash the Hokusai, you can only trash Adrian, so you have to come back. Like there's enough ways to compound the problems that are being presented to you. But genuinely, it is a very, very good card and works with the Tea as well, as much as that text doesn't matter too much.
Yeah, I mean, we've been playing a lot of the Tei locally, and he's one of the cornerstone cards for that deck.
Yeah, he's good. Cool character too. Fuji, Obokata rotated. We knew that going into this, and we got a new 5/3 that has much more interesting text. I was stoked about this one because it turns out to be like the ultimate trap, right? Like they have to steal it. They can't choose not to. And what I found to be so astoundingly very fascinating is that we saw at Worlds multiple decks that are punitive Jinteki decks. So you think punitive Counter-Strike, give them a big agenda, do some Fuji damage, and flatline them. But that deck is only running 2 of these, and then 3 bacterial programming, which like literally the most any card has glowed up on any rotation. Like that card just suddenly is everywhere, and it's just kicking so much ass. And that deck wants to play bacterial over the Fuji just because that effect is more important. And then maybe you feed them a Fuji on top when they run archives. But I don't know. This card, if you lose it early, you lose the game. And I think that colors me. It sits with me very poorly.
It is the worst 5/3 in faction for Jinteki right now of the 2 that they have available, by a pretty noticeable margin, honestly. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough card. Like I think people thought it was going to do some stuff that it just hasn't ended up doing. Like we haven't seen Neurospike PE.
Not at all.
Fuji Asset Retrieval or anything. So I don't know. It's one of those cards where it's like, I feel like there's a lot of potential there, but in practice, it's just been almost a liability for a lot of decks.
Yeah, it's been really difficult to use. And we did see like Shell Game Jinteki actually was played to competitive success over the last like couple months. Like it's doing okay. It's all advanced events. If they don't run it, you do threaten Neurospike. Like it's kind of cool. But it does feel like in that deck, if they steal one early, you've kind of lost the game. Like it's so much harder when that text again is not active when you steal it and win the game. Like that is hard.
Yeah.
Cool card though.
Yeah.
I just drop it a bit. Like that much. I don't know. Like it's still clearly an important card. It's just like you are going to see it consistently playing against
I think there's going to be some other stuff
good.
Moving up around it. So it's going to kind of fall that way. Actually, I would say even the next card's going to move up quite a bit on our list.
Yeah. That's Mindscaping. We we also saw this card like have a fair bit change of how it was played. Like for the first long time, we saw this as this like sort of, I want to say like red level clearance effect within Jinteki, where it's just like a kind of forgettable econ efficiency option where like you protect the top of R&D, you get a bit of money, and like that's fine, especially when you're just playing like protect the Dr. Vienshin killing until you win the game. But we've also seen this become more important in a lot of decks as a central key piece to the fact that it does 1 to 2 meat damage, which is enough to kill a runner attached to other threats.
Yeah. I mean, the kill side of this, I think, is proven to be pretty potent. The red level clearance, like you'll play it for that in Jinteki and nowhere else, and that's okay. You're not playing 2 influence for red level clearance, but you will play 2 influence for a kill piece.
I've even started cutting this out of Jinteki decks. Like, I don't know. It's so easy to put 3 of these in because it's a smoother card, but I feel like I don't even know if I like that unless I care about all the text on it in Jinteki. But it's just like feels like you're playing this because Jinteki doesn't have better options. It doesn't feel like it's central to the deck.
Yeah, it does feel like if Jinteki had a couple more ways to do incidental tags, it would feel pretty smooth in a Jinteki deck. But Jinteki just doesn't interact with tags still very much. Their 1 tagging ice, which is our next card to talk about, didn't land, and you know, people will always run snare in Jinteki, but this won't make me clear the 2 often. So
it's a super important card out of faction though.
Yeah, that's it. Like I'm actually I would still, even though we're ending on a sour note for it, I'm moving it up. Yeah,
it's good.
It's an important card for what it does.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild how far we've come from Neural EMP, but it's basically like just Neural EMP from the core set, but we have to spend a lot more work to get it to happen. Okay, speaking of the tags, this is Faunatria. When the runner passes this ice, if there are 4 cards in their grip, they take a tag. It does 2 net damage on 2 strength. Mind you, 2 strength actually turns out to be pretty bad in the meta compared to 3 strength. If you want to play a Karuna, which doesn't even see a lot of consistent play, I've seen this card never, but I'm convinced it's annoying.
I think I played against it on stream the other night, and it was annoying, and like it kind of did, it almost did stuff in that game, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I think this card will eventually maybe do something. But it's I don't know. There's part of me that wants to drop it down. The slots are hard because there are just better sentries, right? Saisaton is more painful if you want to actually flatline the runner. Karuna is more taxing if you want to tax the runner, not to mention Anansi, of course. Like, there's just lots of other things it's competing with, and tags in Jinteki just doesn't seem to really be manifesting in anything at the moment.
Yeah, and it was really cool to see like a bit of tag punishment put into every faction that doesn't expect it. Obviously, you kind of have to build into Mindscaping if you want to. I could see dropping this. I think slots are hard are going to change like a fair bit, but yeah, that is kind of where that is. I think that only leaves us with 2 cards. I don't have much to say about Front Company besides it's not doing anything at all. Yeah.
I would almost put it in high binder for now.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything. This card can't be up there. And then Daniela, which is on the cusp.
It's actually done some stuff. Yeah,
it's actually kind of cool.
I actually might put Daniela above Atea. Like I suspect that Daniela and Fuji Asset Retrieval are going to go together to be annoying, and that's going to be the vehicle in a lot of cases.
Yeah. It's weird. Like we've seen, kill combo decks in Jinteki. They're mostly based on punitive right now, which like won't be around forever. Not that, at some point all Netrunner cards are challenged on that angle. But it's not because they're making their remote super difficult. They're just making it financially difficult. They have other tricks. It's not exactly Daniela who gives an additional cost, so you can decide not to access it if things are bad. But
I have seen some Daniela, like not quite grinder decks, but kind of like an old style, like Warroid PE style list, and Daniela does fit really well in those sort of lists. So she's going to have some legs, I think.
That's Jinteki. It was surprising the difference we saw in Jinteki. Like, okay, so going into this competitive season, we saw some Jinteki do well. We saw multiple Jinteki in the top 16. I think it was the same archetype, if I'm not mistaken, like punitive. And they are playing a couple cards from the set. I think Mindscaping on its own was very important, but mostly out of faction. So this did have a huge impact on the meta, as much as it wasn't Atea. And also as much as the cards that came out in the set aren't obviously Atea support, the same way that like all the Shaper cards were obviously like Arasana support. Like the Corp side's a bit more interesting. It's a bit wider. Like it's not too boxed in.
Yeah, and I think Jinteki suffered a little bit for it. Jinteki also like had its strongest deck banned out mid-season. But yeah,
Thankfully.
that's sort of, I mean, thankfully, yeah, I'm not too eager to play against that again anytime soon, but
Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's do NBN. We have an identity. It's Epiphany Analytica. This one I feel unfortunate about because I think I was really excited because that ability seems fine. It seems fun, but like this seems just strictly an unplayable option compared to not only Near Earth Hub, but Reality Plus. If you're going to play NBN assets, you need a really good reason not to do those two. And this is not the reason. This saw technically like some success. We saw some top eights at like Cascadia where you were playing specifically. I think Solomir played a Epiphany deck, if I'm not mistaken, but like, I don't think there's good reason to play this.
No, to me, this is maybe all the way down to slots are hard.
I would go farther. Like, I just don't see why I would play this because it's compared to like NEH. Why?
That's true. I guess I'm thinking like, oh, well, NSG has announced that NEH is not going to be with us in a year. That's true. Right. And so that's why I maybe put in slots are hard. But then I'm like, well, but your point about Reality Plus is also probably true. Like, we're probably not going to get a AR enhanced security, which like makes Reality Plus assets just strictly better than Epiphany. But I think some of the flaws we saw with Epiphany of like, oh, the runner needs to actually go and trash your stuff. Well, you need to make the runner need to trash your stuff. And it's really easy for runners to find ways around that or to trash in ways that are advantageous for them. So yeah, I think this card could drop quite a bit. And, Reality Plus is probably going to eat its cake, even when NEH rotates.
It's like super unfortunate. Like, I think, I don't know, the last NBN identity we saw before this was Pravdivos, and I've said this a lot. I love identities that force you to build different decks. And currently, and we might see more in the next set, there just isn't enough payoff cards for knowing the top 3 of your deck compared to like, any of the other stuff NEH could do. So like this does not feel like fundamentally a different deck than NEH. And once you're in that spot, you're just making a decision like what's going to fire more consistently. And NEH fires every turn. So I don't know. Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Tags. It's a think tank. It's a 3-1. You don't want to score it out, but that's the point. But it turns out, this is genuinely only very annoying in one deck, and it's a good deck. It's a really good deck.
Yeah. Yeah. This is definitely a build around that we thought would not see any build around. But when your goal is give the runner a tag every turn, this card is really, really good for being just very frustrating. Turning on threat and then going away is very impactful, even if that doesn't happen too often. It's, we didn't think about this through fully, and I don't blame us for that, but just the Reality Plus suites that just have only agendas the runner doesn't want to touch are just like it's a work of art, miserable art as someone who doesn't enjoy playing Reality Plus, but a work of art nonetheless. So
yeah, it is entirely Reality Plus that makes us, you never score this out. You don't. You let the runner interact with it, and it's just such a good tempo trade for you. This card is very, very good in only that faction, and it's quite good there. So great.
Yeah.
I guess we should go up in order. I've just been going on by set list. So I guess the next one up on our page is VSA. I never know if it stands for assistant or agent. Turns out it's agent. This is the sort of like IP block meets Turnpike that we really needed when we lost both of those cards at the same time to rotation. And it is a card that you are seeing very, very consistently across a fair bit of decks. And NEH you play one of. In Reality Plus, the face check is good, just like most face checks in that deck. I think the runner loses a click, not break with AI clause, not break with botchless clause, not break with Banhart clause, has been like still relevant, but not like brilliantly relevant. And I would actually say one of the big things that I've noticed is there's no longer any reason in the format that you're punished for having AI installed, which is different than it used to be with IP block. Or like as a criminal, I would destroy my Amakua in certain matchups, and now I can keep it around and just use it on other ice. And that actually makes this like less necessary, where it's nice to have it, but like at the end of the day, if they have a decoder, it's still kind of mid.
I guess to me, this is still hitting the auto include threshold because it is in fact in every single NBN deck. Yep. And I think it's in those NBN decks because the face check on this card is actually brutal. And there are enough runners around that do actually rely on tricks to make it through this kind of the style of card for at least quite a big chunk of the game. That it does quite a bit of work. So I think we actually got this one right. I actually think this might still be in my mind like one of the strongest NBN cards in the set, but I see you moving it around. I would actually keep this to the left of Tarubola. I think it's done a lot more than Tarubola has.
Oh, that's true. It definitively has done more than I think Tattoo Bolo might be a more important card for the faction, but yeah, VSA is doing a fair bit of work, and I like it. Again, it's the same face check on Turnpike, but obviously that's still very, very good. As much as that card is now gone. Okay, it's Oppo. Yeah, this card replaces hard hitting news. Long live hard hitting news. No, sorry. Long rest hard hitting news. I'm glad it's gone. That's all I'm going to say. And this card is both simultaneously like way less powerful in the early game, which rightfully it should be, but then also just like kind of busted powerful false lead or no false lead for the rest of the game because credits only matter to a certain point, and it's hard to clear tags at any sort of speed on turns that this produces forks. This is such an important card in the set and is just keeping NBN alive independently. Without this, NBN isn't a faction.
Yep. Yeah, nothing really to add there.
Yeah, cool.
I will say it doesn't feel oppressive in the same way that hard-hitting news often did.
It does. They score a false lead and then you're meant to play the game while they have an Oppo? Come on, that's not fun. You can't do that.
That's fair.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do. Again, it's not like lose on turn one hard-hitting news. You're also now making decisions to not trash things, which like that's fun. That makes, a bit of a that sort of reprisal sort of threat. It's neat.
Yeah.
All right. Behold, everyone's favorite. It's a snare for tags, and we saw this at top tables. In fact, speak of that sort of false lead deck, don't trash this one because you're going to get Oppo'd on top of the 2 tags. Just don't trash it. I was convinced that we would see this like consistently across like all the R+ decks. It turns out, no, we only see it in like NDH asset spam decks that want to punish you for checking the table at the wrong time. It's obviously very good in that deck. That's a tier 1 deck, but it's like weird that this kind of sung in the spots that I didn't expect it to see.
Yeah, I think we definitely put this here for the wrong reasons, and it ended up in the right place. This is, I think, a really powerful card and will, continue to see play while asset spam exists. And I think it probably will have legs in R+ in certain metas, even if it's not seeing a ton of play right now.
Yeah.
In those decks.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to deal with. It's like such a tempo swing, clearing their tags, them spending only 2 credits in R+. Like it is genuinely difficult, and there is a strong blowout because they can't run late in the turn, but they don't know you have this until it's too late. It's cool. I like it. I don't know if I want to move that much.
I think it's in an okay spot. We'll probably move some other stuff around it.
Yeah. Speaking about other stuff, federal fundraising, there's 2 assets to hit the table. I'm glad that we put this one higher than the other one because this is the one that is genuinely absurdly good, is federal fundraising. It's kind of like a daily business show. It allows you to control the top of the deck, so that protects not only R&D, but also HQ and gives you that sort of card draw that you want. Sometimes it does get ugly. Sometimes you do see too many agendas. Sometimes you refuse to draw and that gives some information to the runner. Also, getting a bunch of these on the table is like kind of fiddly, and I'm not the biggest fan, but this card is absurd. It's just absurd.
Yeah, I wish this card was less fiddly, but it is sure powerful.
Yeah,
this is more
important.
Yeah, I think this is right next to Oppo in my opinion.
Oh, really? That far, huh?
I might even put it above VSA. Like,
yeah, that makes sense.
It's not in every deck, right? So maybe I'm a little bit overrating it relative to VSA, but I think this card does so much work, and every time I don't trash one of these, I go, I should have, shouldn't I? Right?
Yeah, it's like daily business show. At least it's an easier thing to trash, which is nice. But yeah, that's an immensely powerful effect. That's going to help everyone do the thing that they want to do. Every corp, basically, right? It's good. All right, this is the other asset, and this is meant to be, the only like very obvious Epiphany Analytica support. And I think we said that this was just like genuinely good because it's probably credit positive on every turn you res it. It stacks really well with unique cards, but NBN decks are just not putting cards on the table that generate money. They're not. Yeah. They're like playing HB cards or like Regolith. Well, they're not actually playing.
Yeah, they're playing Regolith. Yeah. I will say, I think I have 2 things to say about this. One, we did overvaluate it, right? You can play other more consistent. I don't think you should probably play Pad Campaign over this, but I think one reason actually not to play this is when squinting, like at this size, getting this confused with Oppo research, I think genuinely is a very good reason to not play this card because if you install an Oppo research as an asset, it's a game loss. And so why play a game loss for a marginal econ card when you can play a regolith? That's like my conspiracy theory about why we don't see balanced coverage. It also becomes really fiddly with federal fundraising on the board, which is its other synergy point. And so it's just like, okay, I'm just going to play a card that is less complex, maybe has a slightly lower ceiling, but just avoid some really annoying edge cases. And like ultimately, like regolith fits better with the NEH plan, maybe padded
with wage
campaign.
workers.
Yeah, with wage workers. Like there's other good reasons, but like the art conspiracy theory to me is actually like a non-zero part of why people aren't playing this card.
I genuinely agree with the art conspiracy theory. I think it is an issue. I think we've seen that on a couple other cards, but not as bad as this, unfortunately. It's kind of hard to tell from a distance.
Yeah, it's weird because they're not that similar arts when you look at them closely, but just from this distance, it's.
Yeah. Have you ever like had a Nico campaign in hand and thought you had a seamless? Like that's the other one that gets me. That one's maybe not as bad. Where do we put this? Like it might be a slots card.
I think this might be a slots card. Like it's a good effect, but it's just displaced by other cards. So.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's almost all of NBN. We have 2 cards left. Oh, firstly,
you get to take a victory lap.
I get to gloat a bit. I think this card is sick. I think it's playable. I think there's a fair few decks that it's an easier recovery than Hedge Fund in some of those lists. I think we're seeing cool synergy decks. I think the big one that we did not realize when we did our first thing is like bacterial programming. Again, we talked about it popping off. Draw 7. Oops. Digital Life for 13, punitive. Like that is sick. Yeah. And we're even seeing like some really strange, Midnight 3 Arcology decks. We're seeing this like as a good recovery in R+, where there's Rashida and to give a tag and to like, it's just a really nice rebound. And on 2 credits, we're not even going to talk about Eternal. Like that's a messed up card, potentially. Yeah. I think it's really, really solid. I would consider playing this over Hedge Fund in some NBN decks. No joke. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it.
Yeah, I've seen it be a hedge fund a lot. So I'm like, I can only get so excited about a 2-cost hedge fund. But as I say that, it's a 2-cost hedge fund. That's pretty good. So like this was clearly not a slots are hard card. Slots are hard card. Yeah.
No, it's definitely worth considering building run hold decks and saying I have a lot of cards in hand. It's a nice economy card. Precision Design, mind you, also one of the winners that people are playing that because 6 hand size, this is good. You don't have a lot of economy, especially burst operation economy in that deck.
Yeah.
Now, on the other side, I think this is the one that you were fighting for harder than I was. And I think this card also is just, it is pretty relevant as much as it's not that popular. I think even the threat of its existence is kind of changing at least a couple of my face checks, but it's good.
Yeah, I definitely forgot about this card existing for a bit, which does maybe go against my hype for the card. It was good at APAC, like immediately right out the gate. It was really important in that deck. And I think like I would not be surprised to see this card be perennially kind of in and out of the meta, just kind of based on what style of Corp NBN is running. And then, how easy, whether or not runners are able, like right now it's not seeing play because a lot of the NBN decks just go from a runner's tag to instantly winning the game. And if that changes, then, hey, maybe this card becomes a little bit more relevant on centrals. To me, this probably moves up to like a low build around.
I think it's like more playable than the 3-1. Like I think you'll see it in more NBN decks and it actually is impactful.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think this card is definitely hurt by being threat 4. As per our earlier discussion, like this card being threat 3 would be pretty gross, I think, because like steal a Bologna and now it's got end the runs for the rest of the game is quite powerful potentially. I think this card like fits a nice niche.
Yeah, cool. That's all of NBN. NBN was doing really well in this competitive season. A lot of the new cards that they got, and like they had to be good because Hard Hitting News rotated. So you definitely need Oppo there. And we just still have really strong NBN assets. We have really strong tag punishment attached to running or specifically trashing stuff. Good spot. As much as like I wish NBN did more than the only one big thing, they've been largely making the same deck for the last like 6 years. It's still doing it really well. And it produces exciting games as long as you're like keeping up with their speed.
Yeah, I think it's, NBN has been just the tags and assets faction with a brief detour into Acme or Asmari and Acme Glacier.
Yeah.
But like this set of NBN decks is a little bit different and kind of interesting. So I'll give it that credit, even if it's still kind of using the same core pieces. It did shift them up at least a little bit.
Yeah, and I do want to shout out, like, I know your testing group has this sort of like kill kind of trap deck, and then we saw like basically HB tempo decks at Reality Plus at top tables at Worlds too. So there's a bit of like diversity there, as much as it is just like, Bologna, Amani, Oppo, and then all that sort of stuff you expect. So like it's still NBN assets, but it's its own unique flavor.
I think until Bologna goes, this is kind of always going to be the flavor of NBN, because that card just pushes a lot of design space around it.
Buckle up. All right, we're almost done. We got Wayland. We got a 4-2 agenda that's expendable that lets you fast advance cards. I was really excited about this card because it has cool text on it, and we do see it in some Wayland decks. Again, some of the more jammy or rushier stuff, especially like it's really nice in home and op. I've seen it nowhere else, but genuinely like there's like 2 Wayland decks. I mean, like 2 Wayland IDs, right? Am I missing something? Is there only 2 Wayland IDs? I think there's only 2 Wayland IDs.
Well, I mean, it depends on whether or not you count Sokka's deck as a deck. Right?
Oh,
that would be a third one.
Yeah, there's 3 Wayland IDs now. Okay, hold on. It's fun. It's a fun card. Yeah. It's like it's doing good. Would you still play it in your type of op lists instead of Audacities, or would you put Audacities in?
A lot of people have taken my style of op list and just put more fast advance in it, which is probably correct, even if it's not my favorite. And slash and burn is having a home there. It's having a home in kind of more horizontal fast advance ops. So yeah, I think this is, and even in some kill ops, like this ends up still finding a slot because it helps you score the SF more reliably. So I think this card, we were pretty high on it. It's maybe not actually as well performing as this would maybe imply, but it's still a very strong card.
It's definitely a bit lower, but it is, it's a card you're going to consider in faction because it does open up, a lot of the things that you want to be doing.
Yeah.
Okay. So tree line is up that high, but also in one world. So
who could say? Who could say?
I like the numbers on this card. Nobody's playing it because just having a barrier like this on 4 strength makes no sense for op. It makes no sense for outfit. And luckily, barring Sokka, there is no deck that plays this. And genuinely, I do not want to play into Wayland Glacier, so I'm happy. But this is the numbers on this are good.
Yeah, this is a gross card that fortunately is gross in a meta that we're not currently in, as much as Sokka tries to steer us that way.
Yes. So, yikes. I don't want to play against it. It is good. It's not as prevalent at the meta, but I do think the numbers on it are solid. I don't know.
I think it's definitely. I think it's not an auto include at all, right? It's definitely moves into build around. I don't even think it's that strong of a build around. Yeah, I think there's probably maybe even to the right of Vovo.
Yeah,
right. Like Vovo has a pretty common place, and you know what? If Sokka's list starts taking over, then you guys viewers can just laugh at us and move it up, to the left.
But Sokka's list can't start taking over because rounds are only 40 minutes. It's impossible. No, it's
and also
it's a good.
There might be more than one Shaper player in the top 60.
Shout out to Sokka though. Obviously, a stellar player.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think Sokka. This was another Worlds where Sokka won, and you're like, I don't know if he brought the best decks, but he's definitely the best player there. So
it's a good deck for the top cut. I like it a lot. What do we have next up?
Not many people can tech their decks for the top cut. Most people tech their decks to get into the top cut.
Yes.
So yeah.
Oh, he was one step further than that. Tucana. It's largely okay. This is a sick card. It's sick. We haven't seen it anywhere else. You haven't seen this yet because by the time we're recording tomorrow on the channel, by the date of recording, I have a Tucana ganked Asa deck. And like genuinely, it's kind of messed up what that deck can do, as much as I don't think it's a tier 1 deck. But I think out of faction, like this is a really cool card if you're jamming in a remote server as soon as possible, as much as you only see this as an op. And I do think it's one of the coolest cards in that whole deck.
Yeah, I still want someone to try Tucana PD. I think that deck was a ton of fun when I was playing it. But it's hard to fit at 3 influence out of faction. But in op, it's like people are playing 3 Maviruses mostly to get Tucana, right? And then also like Mavirus is a card you want for other reasons, but it's like fetching Tucana is often what those decks are doing first. And I thought this card's sick. I think we got it basically right. I
I think we don't got the meta share on it correctly because people are pretty averse to playing Op because it seems much more difficult than I'd argue it can be, as much as it is a very interesting card. But the power level of the card is definitely there. It's just hard to play.
Yeah, I think if people move to more of the fast advanced versions, which I actually think are easier to play and probably a little more powerful, they'll discover how powerful Tucana is and start really enjoying it. It is a card you can mess up on yourself sometimes, so like there is some skill cap there. But I think that's, I don't know, as someone who enjoys that part of card games, I think that's a cool thing to have.
Next up, we have Valenchow. We lost Bulwark and we got this Illicit Ice. When it came out, I was like, whatever, you can beat it by having more credits. And that's honestly kind of true. I've seen a lot of runners just go through this with credits because their credits don't get eaten up that easily because they're spending mostly house money while running. And I still think this card is obviously really good in the list. I think the whole remove a tag subroutine or text on it, is like very strange because I think it's insinuating this should go into a tag deck, but no, that's not happening. I don't know how that would happen. But this card's obviously very important in only one deck and one deck only, and it's outfit. And you're running it because you have to. It's still good in that deck, though.
Yeah, I mean it reses this for free, right? Because it's
on face check.
So like having a free ice on face check that swings for 4 credits is a big deal. I don't know. I feel like this is a card we could justify pushing up higher just because outfit turned out to be a pretty big meta player. It can go the less of Tucana. I'll let that one go.
Speaking of it's weird actually to say speaking of outfit because we did see this recently in a very high placing outfit deck at Worlds, which is Angelique Garza Correa, the hit woman out there doing some meat damage. You do see this in a couple archetypes. You see this as like a pseudo fast advance piece in some of the asset obs. You see this as damage ob as a trap. You see this in punitive lists. This card is like way more flexible than it looked when she came out. And I thought we would just see her in like Jinteki Prison, like Warroid decks. And we're actually seeing her in more proactive game plans, which I'm kind of into.
Yeah, I think she's been showing up in her presence in op decks has been really cool to see. So I'm kind of glad we got this one wrong, even though I worry that someday we'll be regretting that. But so far that hasn't happened.
I think she slides up just a bit. Like we're seeing obviously more of her than like most of these cards.
Yeah. We skipped over Pivot.
Oh dang, yeah, you're totally right. It's Pivot. It seems good.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen it played almost at all, right? But it still
seen
seems
in
like
Reality
it's one of those
Plus.
cards. Oh, okay. I missed that part of it being in Reality Plus, but
I think you saw it in like Sparrow Brawler type decks because its ability to pull, if you're playing that 4/2 agenda, that if the runner has tagged, it just like gets scored. It's kind of cool for that. Obviously you have tag punishment. You also saw this in outfit decks because you can always pivot for regulatory capture and audacity as a win condition. So there's like some niche cases to it. I think like what this card does is universally very good to be able to produce the right tag punishment. But like we're more often than not just having decks that have enough tag punishment that like finding the one bespoke piece is not worth the 2 influence. It's strange. It's like finding an agenda and being able to install it for the same click on threat 3 seems so important, except you almost never see that line of text being used.
Yeah, I feel like actually I haven't seen much Pivot at all, but I have seen it used for that. Weirdly enough. But yeah, it's one of those cards where it's like, it's probably like, I almost don't mind leaving it in auto include, even though it's not seeing much of any play right now, but it's just like one of those cards where it's like, this is going to see play at some point. Cause Consulting Visit was like a meta staple, and this is Consulting Visit with mostly just upside.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like even I think the outfit deck that Odo took into third at Worlds is like running 3 copies of Under the Bus, which like, can you argue that you can replace a copy of Under the Bus with Pivot and just grab it for when you need it? Maybe that's too slow in tempo, but it's like such an easy card to take just about any deck that has an important piece and put it in there and argue that you didn't make the deck like fundamentally that much worse. But obviously, like that deck did well enough on its own. So what can I say? I don't think it's an auto include, but I think it's like a card that you should consider, and a lot of people aren't considering it.
Yeah, maybe around Tree Line then. I don't know.
Yeah, that's like amount of play it's seeing. That's correct. I'd argue though that the card could be seen in most decks. It's just I don't think we have a huge reason to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we just like kind of Yeah, not a lot. Where's this one? It's Cybersand.
Yeah.
How did you tell me about Cybersand, Jeff?
I mean, I think we actually nailed it in one. I think we had both like played it like for 2 days and we're like, oh, this card's super cool, but it just doesn't have a home. And that's like a quintessential slots are hard. Like if you could get this into your deck, like if you could have this card appear in your hand, it would have good board states. But drawing this card, installing it, like, or maybe in the case of Cybersand, you just need to appear on your board even more than it needs to appear in your hand.
And it's like, it's the same as the 3x Vovo issue. It's just like, okay, you got to turn one in your Acer group deck, heaven forbid. You put it behind ice, they ran their ice, you res the Cybersand, and now the money you need to res your second piece of ice is locked on the Cybersand. So you're incentivized to crack it right away, which is like obviously salad. So like it's hard. It's hard to make this good, but it also is like, I don't know, this seems like an important card in Eternal Infinite combos, which like, great, good.
Yeah. I mean, also, you know, if they ever one day print a good one cost card that Op wants to fetch, suddenly this card will see some play. But right now in standard, there's really nothing that Op wants at one cost. And who knows, maybe they'll make it stay that way.
I think we need to do something like this and then drop this even lower.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay. I'm less sold on those Jinteki Ice than you are. But
that's saw play. People, okay, no, I can't move this above that. I can move this down. Wait, this is doing the opposite of what you wanted me to do with this.
Yeah, it's fine. I don't think what you did is wrong either, so I'm okay with leaving it as is. But
okay, one last Wayland card. This is the worst card in the set. I think it's worse than Salvo Testing. I don't know why it wasn't the worst card in the set. This doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I think we said Salvo Testing is just going to actually make your deck worse because you have a blank 5/3, and that's actively bad for you, as opposed to like a below average econ card.
People have won games with Salvo Testing. Nobody's won a game with Armed Acid Protection.
Yeah, that's fair. It's probably the worst card in the set.
Okay, we do have one more though. And this is a really fun, contentious one to have as the last one. It's our friend B1001, the Terminator. We dunked on this guy. And then he came in and, spoilers warning, almost won the Canadian Nationals I hosted in a really cool deck. We haven't seen it at the highest levels. It's like really weird that we go to the neutral faction, you know, to have a tag punishment, because if you're playing NBN tags, you have better, maybe in faction tag stuff, but it presents a puzzle that is genuinely potentially difficult for runners to deal with, as much as it's far from bulletproof.
Yeah, so I will say my understanding is from UK Nats, this deck B1001, not T1001, or T1000, did actually show up. I think maybe got second at the event. So that's 2 events now. It's come in second. Maybe that's a sign that it's really quite good. Maybe, you know, maybe there'll be some pedants out there that say, oh, well, it's not good enough, but not. But no, I like the card is clearly much better than we gave it credit for. Funhouse, Reality Plus, I would argue are the cards that actually make it work. But you know what? Those are going to be those are gateway cards, and it's a strong piece there.
It's like air enhanced security, Funhouse, Reality Plus. I've seen ablatives, I've seen mana garms.
Yeah.
Like there's just weird ways to make it as annoying as possible, and it genuinely is a problem at some point. Like I wonder if False Lead wants to play it. I just think like you have a more direct kill package that wins the game on the spot.
Yeah.
Is that too high? It's a weird spot for that to go suddenly.
No, I think that's fine. I think it's I would probably put Mick to the left of it, MIC, cool. But yeah.
All right. That's the corp side. Genuinely not as bad as I thought it'd be. Like I think the runner side actually looks slightly more different than the like before and after. I think on the corp side it's not as bad.
It's hard for me to say. I'd have to really go and do a photo comparison. I feel like the runner side, we made lots of small changes of, oh, this actually did see this play, didn't see this play, like very clearly. Yeah. Corp side, I felt like there's a lot of things that we were just like, oh, actually, it turns out like almost the entire Jinteki faction we got wrong, basically, right? Yep. A lot of, you know, the HB card, actually, I guess we got HB mostly right. We got Wayland pretty good. Yeah, maybe, you know what? I think we underrated a couple NBN cards. 3 NBN cards moving up from slots are hard to build around. I think is a big change. And then, staying at 5 auto includes, like when you look at this, you're like, oh yeah, of course NDN has done really well this season. They got a bunch of really powerful new cards. And that's kind of,
I think, NBN is the most interesting one because not only did a bunch of cards come up, but like one card went from auto include to binder. And I think that actually kind of explains the problem. It's like, I think maybe we want to evaluate with a wider card pool, but like, unfortunately, so many of these cards are just like, yeah, it's absurd in Reality Plus. And then there's like no reason to do that much else different. So like, if it's not a Reality Plus support card, it goes down. If it is Reality Plus or NEH support card, it goes significantly up because it turns out that's how it works out right now.
Yeah.
That's a cool set. I don't know. It's still really great. I mean, all this stuff is still the same play.
This is great. I always am eager and waiting for new cards, but this is genuinely a meta that I'm really happy to keep iterating on and playing and then goofing around. And it's like, now that the bulk of the competitive season is done, like I get to go to my casual events and I can maybe build a Mercury deck again and clown around with that and have a lot of fun. And like, there's toys, in all of these tiers that I want to play with and play more of. And
exactly.
I don't know, this meta has been a lot of fun, and going back over this tier list and seeing like, we got some things pretty wrong, but we also, we hit a little bit below our Borealis and Midnight Sun tier list in terms of getting it right. But I think we vibed pretty close to where a lot of things ended up, which I think we can still be kind of proud of. But
I think that was like a sentiment that like even rung through like, the day before Worlds, is that there's so many cards still on this page that I can see that I understand I have not put enough time in to really push the limits with it because there was so many good things to try and bring to Worlds, right? Like I'm convinced there's more that you can do with Daniela. I'm convinced there's more that you can do with Angelique. Like there's a lot of really cool stuff here that I don't think even without releasing new cards that the meta is even solved yet. Do you think the meta solved? I don't think the meta solved.
I don't think the meta is solved. No, I definitely not. I think it's like to see Worlds and then UK Nats, and they look like very different metas. And, we're going to have a couple more nationals events that are probably all going to look like different metas. It's like people are bringing stuff that they enjoy playing and they feel strong while playing. And that's super cool that we don't have like you can think that this deck is fun, but it just gets eaten by X deck. The closest to that is probably some of these asset spam NBN decks. You have to have a game plan for them as the runner, I feel like. But, and so maybe there could be some disruption there, I guess. But genuinely, like, this meta does feel like there's a lot more cards that are underexplored than like, oh, we tried it and it's not as good as X kind of things. So
exactly, which is super exciting. And I don't know. I always find it really fun to revisit these, and I'm glad we did. On that note, again, if you've been watching, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you watched the ones before. Again, the corp side is on Jeff's channel. The runner side's on mine. Link in the description below. But if you feel like we're far off on any of this stuff, if you're happy, if you want to gloat about, a comment that you posted a while ago, like go ahead and pin it in there. Like that's going to be a lot of fun. But we'd love to hear what you think, and also what you're thinking about the meta, whether it is competitive or casual too. Like that's also a really big part, as much as we're focusing more on the former than the latter here. On that note, Jeff, thanks so much for joining me. Hope you had fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This was a blast.
Again, do you want to shout out your channel for those who don't know?
Oh, yeah, sure. People should check out my channel, YsengrinSC. You catch me every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern these days. I usually stream for about 2.5 hours. And I try and look at the game from a pretty competitive and like self-improving lens. So, I may be a little bit less friendly and positive than Andre is at times, but but I have a lot of fun, and I always appreciate people coming by and chatting. And I'm hoping to do some more collaborations with other people talking about their decks and replays and stuff. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on. And if you haven't seen the link to Andre's Patreon in the video description and you want to support him, you should do that. It helps keep the king of the Netrunner stream, the Netrunner community, doing this and dedicating as much energy as he does to it. So definitely, if you have the means, consider giving him some support.
That's kind. I want to say that's not a nickname I have made up for myself. That's been voiced onto me by Jeff's family. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back in a bit with some more content coming up, but hopefully, again, you're enjoying the Automata Initiative and excited for the next set coming up. It's a couple months. We still got some time. Thanks for watching. Ciao. Hey, thanks so much for watching. As you might have seen, that video was recorded about a month ago now. Unfortunately, it took a bit of time to get out. But while editing that together, it's kind of wild the way that I could see that my opinions on certain cards have changed even in just a couple weeks. Maybe that means I've enjoyed Imp, Solidarity Badge, Audrey decks way more than I thought I would in the last couple weeks, or maybe now I have an understanding that Greasing the Palm is just probably good enough. Sometimes you just need a good enough card in your deck. Good enough is fine. Huge thank you, of course, to Ysengrin and to Jeff for joining me for these, not only the tier list, but the tier list reviews a couple months later. I always find those to be, in some cases, the more interesting piece. And if you want to check out his channel, let alone his part of the tier list we did a couple months ago, links to all that will be in the description. Go over there, give him a subscribe, give him a like. Friday night streams, good fun. And of course, a huge thank you to all these names here and more. These are just some of the folks that kindly support the Metropole Grid. We're supported on Patreon. And the sort of videos like this, the sort of editing, the sort of live streaming, all the other stuff that comes out on the channel just simply would not be possible without the support from the community. So thank you so much to all these names, and of course to the Daily Cast patrons. Now, if you want to make your own tier list, we have links to all of the tier maker templates. They're just in the description, runner and corp stuff, and we'd love to see your opinions on this. We only talk about standard, but when it comes to things like startup or eternal, let alone doing the standard tier list even better than we did potentially, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And of course, if you think that there's something we've misanalyzed, or you have a spicy take we haven't heard, we'd love to hear all that stuff in the comments. So please hit us up. And with that, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in a bit.